This right here, what we just got finished watching against Atalanta. 0-0. Tightly contested game. Honestly, for the neutral, not the best 90 minutes of action in terms of excitement, in terms of getting you off the edge of your seat, etc., etc. You feel me? However, one thing about this Arsenal team is they are very, very difficult to break down. Genuinely, we talk about their defense, right? White, Saliba, Gabriel, Timber now as well too. That unit, going back to last season, I know Timber wasn't there, but whether it was Kivior, they're incredible. That defensive four right there, good luck trying to break it down. Good luck. Honestly, Spurs, even against the half-fit Arsenal team, they couldn't even threaten them, in my opinion. City, I am fully expecting City to, again, struggle to break down Arsenal. You look at the last few games. Arsenal makes it difficult for them. Arsenal, for me, they're the best defensive team in the league, in the world, in my opinion. And I actually would go on to say they're one of the best defensive teams I have seen. And one thing I like about Arsenal defensively, they take a lot of pride in their defensive performances. All of these guys love defending. And now you kind of add to that David Raya, who, bro, the last 5, 6, 7 games, this guy's playing like Iker Casillas. I've always thought David Raya was a good goalkeeper. I mean, I used to cover Brentford back in my St. Mary's days. I used to go and interview Thomas Frank. I used to write papers on the team and stuff like that. And I remember asking Thomas Frank a question because I think it was his first season there in the Premier League. Sorry, it was his first season in the Premier League. And there was a point where David Raya was out for Brentford for a few months. And who did they bring in? I can't remember his name exactly who they brought in. But basically, it was like a massive fall off. Not in terms of even shot stopping, but how good he was as well too, playing that long ball over the top to Ivan Toney. The two of them had a very, very good partnership. Everything that kind of came from Ivan Toney really came from David Raya to start with. But I've always thought he's been a good goalkeeper. But the way he's playing this year, right, has been absolutely ridiculous. He's playing at a world-class level this season. The double save against Aston Villa, against Ollie Watkins. You can say all you want, and I agree. It's a poor miss from Ollie Watkins. But the goalkeeper is not expected to make a save there. It's a crazy double save. You look at the North London derby. Again, you look at the game against Brighton. Let's be real. He probably kept them in it at times. And then you look at tonight. The one time, I wouldn't say the one time because Atalanta played a very, very good game. But the biggest chance of the night falls to Atalanta from the penalty spot. And David Raya is yet again there to save the initial penalty and then dive and pounce like a cat to save the follow-up. The way he's playing right now, you combine that back four with David Raya, forget about it defensively. However, there's a reason why, in my opinion, Arsenal are not going to win the Champions League this year. And there's a reason why even last year, look, I've picked Arsenal to win the league 2 years in a row previous. I don't have them this year, but the last 2 years I've predicted Arsenal to win the league. And it wouldn't shock me if they win the league this year. Just to say that. I favor City, but it wouldn't shock me if Arsenal won it this year. But in the Champions League, last year, I never bought it. And this year, I know, to be fair, people are going to pull me up on this. I said they were one of the favorites, but truthfully, if you ask me, I don't see them winning it this year either. In Europe, in the Champions League, I've always said this, right? I always feel like over a 38-game season, it really comes down to how big your squad is, obviously how good your squad is, but how also big your squad is, how much depth do you have? Can your manager kind of cook up and have you organized in a set way of playing that is sustainable from match day 1 to match day 38? I really think that's how you win a league. And of course, you have to have a great team. But really consistency, coaching, and squad depth as well too is the name of the game when it comes to winning a league. However, in Europe, always maintain this. This is where, and you guys can disagree with me if you want. If you disagree, give me your opinion, and I'll kind of rebuttal that if I can. In Europe, this is where you tend to face the continental managers, the Thomas Tuchels, today the Gasperinis, the Ancelottis, in the past the Guardiolas before he obviously came to England, the Simone Inzaghis. You tend to face these really, really intelligent and really, really top-tier continental managers who, in Europe, aren't asked to basically coach a set way of playing from match day 1 to match day 38. No, in Europe, it's really about game planning for a certain opposition. Now more than ever, because at least before in the group stage, you got to play a team home and away. Now, in this table, you got to game plan for one game. Gasperini probably doesn't have to see Arsenal again this year. So how am I going to game plan against them for this one game? And in this one game, we are going to do our best to completely nullify Arsenal's strengths. We're going to try to... It's like a chess game, really. It's like a chess game between two managers, which often leaves these European games not really being decided by one manager. Of course it happens, right? One manager can completely outcoach another. But often in these cagey, tightly contested European matches, I always think the difference maker, and it's why you always see the same teams and the same players usually winning the Champions League, it always comes down to X factor. When your system is faltering, when your manager is running out of ideas, when the rest of your team aren't really playing up to par because the system, again, has not been figured out, but it's a game of chess. The other opposition just moved their queen. You're kind of in a situation now. In those moments, even if you as a player aren't playing well, what can you do as an individual outside of the system to kind of create a winning, successful moment for your team? I'm sorry, the only team genuinely that I can think of that didn't win the Champions League with some form of extreme X factor from their players is that Chelsea team under Thomas Tuchel. That I can remember. I didn't see Porto 2004, so I can't speak on that. But that Chelsea team under Thomas Tuchel, that was one of the craziest defensive teams ever. And they all just came together for like 6 months under Thomas Tuchel and beat everybody in front of them. Outside of that, in the Champions League, look, of course, tactically your manager has to be up to scratch. Yes, the rest of your team has to be very good, but the individual moments in these tightly contested European knockout games are decided by your individual players. Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi, Neymar. That's how you win these knockout games. Even last season, Arsenal versus Bayern. Who was the better team? Arsenal, pound for pound, were probably the better team than Bayern throughout last year's campaign. Bayern had a poor season in the Bundesliga. Relatively. Arsenal almost beat City to the league. When it came to a European game, Thomas Tuchel versus Mikel Arteta, there's not much in that. So then, what does it come down to? In those key decisive moments, are you banking on Harry Kane? Are you banking on Gabriel Jesus? Are you banking on Leroy Sané? Are you banking on Gabriel Martinelli? It's simple, right? And you even look at last year, right? Arsenal struggled against Porto. Forget about even Bayern. They had to grind to beat Porto. And Porto are not anything special, let's be real. But their manager, Conceição, coached an incredible game against Arteta, stifled them, and in those tough defensive moments, Arsenal's attackers and their creative players struggled to really create outside of Arteta's system. And you've seen it now, in my opinion, quite a few years under Arteta in Europe, even dating back to the Europa League. There's a reason why, for as brilliant as Arteta has done in domestic football, in the Premier League, in Europe, whether it's been the Europa League or the Champions League, let's be real, Arsenal have not pulled up any trees. And to be honest with you, I don't really expect that to change now either. And this is why, for me, I didn't give Arsenal a very high rating on their transfer score. Again, like I said, they're going to contest for the league. They might even win it. I'm not going to say they're not going to win it. And defensively, I'll maintain this. They're the best defensive team in the world, in my opinion. But I'm sorry. I'm watching this team try and break down well-organized defenses and try and outsmart the tactical game plan that a top manager like Gasperini has kind of set up. Bro, Atalanta are one of the worst defensive teams in Serie A. Atalanta are hardly a defensive powerhouse, but Gasperini is an incredibly intelligent manager. And I think the way he set up today completely stifled Arsenal. That's fine. That happens during games, bro. That happens. But in those moments, where are the players that are able to just kind of bail you out? This is why, for me, a guy like Martin Odegaard kind of being out for as long as he potentially is an issue for Arsenal. And I see Odegaard on... First of all, that's all Twitter talk, right? Any Arsenal fan that doesn't value what Martin Odegaard brings to your team, bro, come on. Seriously? What are we doing here? What are we doing here? The guy is the creative fulcrum for this team. The guy is the one who keeps everything ticking. In tight spaces. Incredible. Such a good footballing mind. Obviously wears the armband, but a leader anyways. Pretending like Martin Odegaard doesn't have a huge role in this team is ridiculous. But that's the kind of player, in my opinion, that has a bit of X factor. For me, in those European games last year against Porto and against Bayern, I thought he was one of Arsenal's better players. But I look at the rest of this team. Saka, for me, was really, really poor today. And to be honest with you, I think he was pretty quiet in the North London derby. And he's probably fortunate that Ake isn't playing this weekend because he typically tends to struggle against a big body like Nathan Ake. That's not to say Bukayo Saka is a rubbish player. Bukayo Saka is one of the best wingers in the world. And he has proven at times that he's capable of producing these, what I call X-Factor moments, these individual moments of brilliance. He's scored so many now where he cuts in and hits a top corner. That, for me, is creating something out of nothing. But does he do it enough to the level of, like, the elite top-tier players? I don't know about that. And that's nothing offensive against Saka. I think he's a brilliant player. But the next tier up, match winners on the knockout stage, I think he still needs some consistency in his moments of brilliance to kind of be viewed as that kind of player. But yeah, I just look at this team, right? And this is, again, why, for me, personally, I wasn't really impressed with Arsenal's market. And that's not to say I don't rate any of their three players that they brought in. Sterling is going to be a very useful player for them. Good eye for goal. Movement is incredible. Experience, winner. But Sterling is also not somebody that you're going to give the ball and kind of just hope that creates something out of nothing. He's a guy that really you want to be feeding in behind. You want to be playing at the back post. He's that kind of player. Calafiori, great option to have. Hasn't started a single game for Arsenal. I'm sure he will get some starts eventually this season, but he was a depth option. Going to be great over a 38-game season, but in a Champions League game, I don't know what that's really changing for Arsenal, in my opinion. And Mikel Merino, who, to be fair, I probably like that signing more than any of them. Because genuinely, if we look at that midfield, right, I got laughed at in comments, right? Obviously, shout out to every one of these guys who clip my streams or clip my videos and post them on TikTok and Instagram. I appreciate all these guys. But there was one video that they posted of me basically saying Thomas Partey physically is cooked. And I was getting killed saying, oh, it's one game. He's just coming back. But bro, I don't care what anybody says. Thomas Partey physically is finished. This guy is cooked athletically. Cooked. The evidence is there week in, week out. Every single week, Thomas Partey is making another person on the other team look like an all-timer. I said it before, I'll say it again. He made Morgan Rogers look like Juan Roman Riquelme. He made Joao Pedro a few times when they were isolated 1v1 on the wing. He's moving like R9. Today, bro, the way Lookman and those guys were running rings around him. Partey's gone, bro. We talk about Casemiro kind of being on the decline, and trust me, his decline was quicker and sharper than Partey's. But his kind of makes sense for the amount of minutes that he's played in his career, his age. It makes sense. Partey, genuinely, like how he's fallen off this badly is insane to me, bro. So Merino, for me, especially on the continental stage, I think a player like Merino will be really, really good for Arsenal. But overall, as a window, I don't think Arsenal are any better poised to compete in Europe than they were 6 to 12 months ago. That's my honest opinion. And it's because, again, they lack for me that little bit of individual brilliance that, frankly, only the best players in the world are able to provide. Who was it the other day that said, what's the best way to break down a low block? Someone either said it on Twitter or a manager was asked that. They said, what's the best way to break down a low block? Individual brilliance. Players getting on the ball and just making things happen. That's the best way to break down a low block. That's the best way to completely unsettle a very, very tight, tenacious defense. Just a player getting on the ball and making something out of nothing. For me, Arsenal don't have enough of those players. I don't think they had enough of those players last year, and I don't think enough was done in the market to kind of address that this year. Anyways, just to kind of finish up on Arsenal, they got a draw against Atalanta. In the grand scheme of things, on face value, that's a decent result. Going to what's it called, Bergamo, and getting a result away from home to Atalanta, who just a year ago basically claimed the scalps of Leverkusen, who didn't lose a single game all year, and Liverpool at Anfield. It's a good result on face value. But I think going forward, look, Arsenal, I think, are going to play Inter. That's going to be another game where Inzaghi, look, Arteta's not going to out-tactic Inzaghi. I'd be madly surprised if he does. That's going to be another very frustrating game for Arsenal. Inter are going to give Arsenal hell. I'm not sure if it's at the San Siro or if it's at the Emirates, but they're going to give Arsenal a dreadful time of it. And again, you're going to be looking, scrambling your head, saying, who's the guy to kind of dig us out of trouble? Who's the guy we can just kind of give the ball to? Give it and pray. That's what I call it. I don't know if there's enough players on Arsenal that are able to do that. At the San Siro, bro, Arsenal are not... I'll be shocked if Arsenal even score in that game. That's not to say they're going to lose, but that's going to be another game. Bro, Atalanta are not a brilliant team. They're Gasperini, great coach, and they have some nice pieces, but Atalanta are not the best team in the world. Inter are a far better team than Atalanta. That's going to be a tough game for Arsenal, man. Are you surprised with the little changes Arteta made? To be honest with you, no. Because if you remember last season as well, too, in Europe, he really prioritized Gabriel Jesus. Because when I talk about X-Factor players, right, to be fair, the one guy I haven't really mentioned is actually Gabriel Jesus. Because he has a little bit of je ne sais quoi, if you want to call it, right? Like very, very quick feet, very imaginative. Like he's not going to pick up the ball and kind of score from 30 yards, and he's not the best finisher. We all know that. But in terms of kind of unlocking a defense with a little moment of magic, Gabriel Jesus is actually a player of that ilk. And I think it's a reason why last year he went to Gabriel Jesus as often as he did. Bro, for me, I remember more moments from Gabriel Jesus in the Champions League than I do in the Premier League. So that bit didn't really surprise me. Trossard, I know he really likes Trossard as well too when it comes to these European games. But now that Sterling is in the picture, to be honest with you, again, I say this every game, right? And some Arsenal fans in my YouTube comments are saying, you're way too harsh on this guy. You're way too harsh. It's not, for me, it's not harsh. It's just like, I say whatever I think, I just say. Martinelli, for me, is a player that if he hasn't regressed, he hasn't progressed enough from 2 years ago. That's the way I view it. And again, I feel like all of these games, right? Like I understand also why Arteta uses him because of his work rate. You look at the game against Spurs, the guy runs his ass off, right? But the efficiency in terms of actually beating his man. And you can give me this bullshit about how many dribbles he completed against Spurs. Do me a favor. Do me a favor. This isn't Twitter. You don't have to bring me a sofa score rating. What is it? Most dribbles completed. I watched the game. He's good at making a 1-2 and kind of running in behind. He's a threat in behind. But in terms of actually just like playing against a settled, deeper team, Martinelli is not that guy for me. And the issue with Martinelli as well too now is his finishing. That used to be the banker with Gabriel Martinelli, right? I don't think Martinelli has ever been, in my eyes, considered an elite technician or an elite dribbler, but has good movement, and in front of goal, he's a decent finisher. I don't know what the stat is. Guys are saying no goals or assists in 17 games. Jesus Christ. So this is a player that already isn't really giving his full back hell like that and isn't really being productive in front of goal. At the moment, let's call it what it is. Martinelli is starting at the moment because A, Sterling has just arrived to the team and it's probably too early to immediately integrate him. B, the fact that Trossard is better off the bench, which he's shown a constant amount of times. And C, the fact that Martinelli runs like no one's business. He puts in so much work. But in terms of actually making the team better, I think it's debatable whether right now Arsenal's best team has Gabriel Martinelli starting from the beginning.